The moving trucks pulled into 347 Oak Ridge Avenue on a pristine Sunday morning in May. James Chen stood in the circular driveway of his new home, watching as movers carefully navigated his wife's beloved grand piano through the double doors. After 15 years of building his software company from a garage startup to a respected security firm, he'd finally achieved the dream. A 4,200 square foot Tudor-style home in the prestigious Oak Ridge Estates. Sarah, his wife of 12 years, emerged from the house with their 8-year-old twins, Lily and Luna, all three carrying boxes labeled Kitty Chen in careful black marker. The girls had inherited their mother's analytical mind. Sarah was a chemistry professor at the local university, but they'd gotten their father's infectious enthusiasm. They'd spent weeks planning their new rooms, creating detailed PowerPoint presentations to argue for their choice of wall colors. The circular driveway had been a major selling point. Perfect for teaching the girls to ride bikes, Sarah had said during the viewing, and James had immediately envisioned weekend afternoons filled with the sound of children's laughter. The previous owners had maintained pristine landscaping, with carefully trimmed hedges and a beautiful stone path leading to a backyard that practically begged for summer barbecues. Their new neighbors seemed welcoming enough. The Johnsons from next door had already brought over a homemade apple pie, and the elderly couple across the street, the Paddles, had offered their extra garage space for storage during the move. Several kids around the twins' age had shyly waved from their yards, their parents encouraging them to introduce themselves. Everything was perfect, until precisely 2:47 p.m., when Patricia Whitmore made her entrance. She appeared as if summoned by the sound of children's joy, her Italian leather sandals clicking against the pavement as she marched across the street. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun that seemed to stretch her facial features into permanent disapproval. Despite the warm May afternoon, she wore a crisp white blazer over designer jeans, a tablet clutched in her manicured hands like a weapon. "Mr. Chen?" Her voice carried across the driveway, cutting through the cheerful chaos of moving day. "I'm Patricia Whitmore, president of the Oak Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." She didn't offer her hand to shake, instead tapping rapidly on her tablet. "I see you haven't submitted Form 27B regarding your moving schedule. All external activities must be approved 2 weeks in advance." James blinked, still holding a box marked Office Supplies. "I wasn't aware. And these vehicles," she continued, gesturing to the moving trucks, "exceed our street parking limitations, not to mention the noise ordinance violations." She glanced pointedly at Lily and Luna, who were giggling as they unpacked their collection of science-themed garden gnomes, a graduation gift from Sarah's doctoral students. "The previous owners didn't mention," James began, but Patricia was already taking photos with her tablet, her lips curled in a barely concealed sneer. "You'll receive the official violations by email." She paused, her eyes lingering on the girls' gnomes. "And do review the community guidelines regarding lawn ornaments. We maintain certain standards here in Oak Ridge Estates." As she turned to leave, James caught a glimpse of her screen. She was already drafting an email titled "New Violations, 347 Oak Ridge." Below it, a partially visible folder labeled Problem Properties contained what looked like dozens of similar reports. Sarah appeared at his side, squeezing his hand. "Well," she whispered, "I guess we've met the neighborhood watch." James forced a smile, but something in Patricia's demeanor had set off his professional alarm bells. After 15 years in cybersecurity, he developed a sixth sense for trouble. And Patricia Whitmore, she radiated trouble like a poisonous flower radiates warning colors. The Great Gnome Incident, as it would later become known throughout Oak Ridge Estates, began exactly 17 days after the Chens moved in. Lily and Luna had spent their Saturday morning carefully arranging their beloved collection of scientist gnomes along the garden path. Each ceramic figure wore a tiny lab coat and safety goggles, some holding miniature beakers or test tubes, a whimsical tribute to their mother's profession. "This one's Marie Curie," Luna explained proudly to Mrs. Patel, who had stopped to admire their work. "See her little radioactive symbols?" The elderly neighbor chuckled, praising the girls' creativity and scientific knowledge. The doorbell rang at 7:00 a.m. sharp the next morning. James, still in his pajamas and clutching his coffee mug, opened the door to find Patricia Whitmore's perfectly made-up face wearing an expression of theatrical distress. "Mr. Chen," she began, her tablet already extended like a shield, "I've received multiple complaints about unauthorized lawn decorations." Her French manicure tapped rapidly on the screen, pulling up a series of high-resolution photos of the gnome collection, obviously taken at various angles and times of day. James set his coffee down. "I've reviewed the HOA bylaws thoroughly, Mrs. Whitmore. There's no specific prohibition against garden decorations. Section 7, Paragraph 3 clearly states that all lawn ornaments must be tasteful and in keeping with the community aesthetic," she quoted, though James noticed she wasn't actually reading from anything. "And scientific education isn't tasteful." Sarah appeared behind James, her professor's voice carrying that particular tone her students dreaded during thesis defenses. Patricia's eyes narrowed. "We simply don't do that sort of thing here. Perhaps in other neighborhoods, but Oakridge Estates has standards to maintain, property values to protect." "Property values?" James repeated. "The house 3 doors down has a 6-foot marble fountain with cherubs. The Andersons' water feature is a registered art piece," Patricia snapped. "These items," she gestured dismissively toward the gnomes, "are more suited to a carnival than a prestigious community." "They're educational toys," Sarah interjected. "The girls use them to learn about famous scientists." "I've issued a violation notice," Patricia interrupted, shoving a paper into James's hands. "You have 48 hours to remove the offending items. After that, it's a $100 fine per day per item." She turned on her heel, then paused. "Oh, and do something about those wind chimes. The tinkling is disturbing the peace." James spent the rest of Sunday documenting every lawn ornament in the neighborhood, photographing cherubs, flamingos, and even a life-sized bronze deer. He drafted a detailed email to the HOA board, complete with citations from the bylaws and precedent cases. But when he stepped outside Monday morning to retrieve the newspaper, his heart sank. The garden path was empty. All 12 scientist gnomes had vanished. He found them in the garbage bin at the side of the house, each one deliberately shattered. Tiny ceramic lab coats and broken safety goggles lay scattered among the shards. One small head, still wearing glasses, seemed to stare accusingly up at him. The twins' tears were bad enough, but it was the fear in their eyes that made something snap inside James. He'd seen that look before, in his own reflection, decades ago, when neighborhood bullies had made it clear his family wasn't welcome in their previous suburb. That evening, after the girls were asleep, James sat in his home office, examining the fragments of a particularly well-crafted Einstein gnome. His security firm had started by protecting digital assets, but sometimes he reflected the worst attacks happened in the physical world. He opened his laptop and began to plan. The note appeared in James's mailbox 3 days after the gnome incident, written in elegant cursive on cream-colored stationery. "Coffee at 10, we should talk. Martha Ramirez, 342 Oak Lane." A business card was paper-clipped to the note. Martha Ramirez, retired circuit court judge. James almost dismissed it, but something about the formal tone piqued his professional interest. At 9:57 a.m., he found himself walking up the brick pathway to a beautifully maintained colonial house. Martha, a silver-haired woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a kind smile, opened the door before he could knock. "Right on time," she nodded approvingly. "Come in quickly, before the neighborhood watch reports an unauthorized gathering." The living room already held 4 other people, arranged around a coffee table laden with pastries and documents. James recognized the Paddles from across the street, Mrs. Johnson from next door, and Dr. Thompson, the pediatrician from the corner house. "Welcome to the Resistance," Martha said, handing him a cup of coffee. "Or, as we call it, the Oakridge Underground." Over the next hour, each neighbor shared their Patricia story. Mrs. Johnson's mixed-race grandchildren had been banned from using the community pool due to suddenly enforced guest policies. Dr. Thompson's pride flag had mysteriously vanished 3 times, followed by citations for unauthorized displays. The Patels had received weekly violations for cooking odors until they stopped making traditional Indian dishes. "But this is the real reason I called you here," Martha said, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. 3 months ago, my best friend sold her house and moved away. Dr. Maria Santos, brilliant neurologist, saved countless lives. Patricia made it her personal mission to drive her out. Martha's hands trembled as she opened the notebook. Daily violations, anonymous complaints, suspicious car damage. Maria installed cameras, but they were stolen. Her tires were slashed, always when the cameras were down. The police couldn't prove anything. She spread out dozens of photos, violation notices, and police reports across the coffee table. I started documenting everything after Maria left. Patterns emerged. Every targeted homeowner shared certain characteristics. But Patricia's careful. She knows exactly how far to push without crossing any legally actionable lines. Until now, James said quietly, pulling out his phone to show them his security footage of the gnome destruction. Exactly. Martha's eyes lit up. You've got tech expertise. I've got legal experience. The Patols maintain our neighborhood database. Dr. Thompson handles medical documentation for stress-related health issues. Mrs. Johnson's daughter is a civil rights attorney. She pulled out a sleek laptop. We've created a secure signal group. Everything's encrypted, backed up in triplicate. We document every interaction, every violation, every coincidence. We're building a pattern of systematic harassment. But we've been missing someone with your specific skills, Dr. Thompson added. Someone who understands both digital and physical security. Someone who can help us protect our evidence and our families. James studied the faces around him. He saw determination in their eyes, but also fear. They were risking their homes, their peace of mind, their belonging in this community they'd chosen. I'm in, he said. But we need to be strategic. Patricia's not just a neighborhood busybody, she's running a sophisticated operation of targeted harassment. And in my experience, people like that always make one critical mistake. They start believing they're untouchable. Martha smiled, closing her notebook with a decisive snap. Then let's make sure she learns otherwise. Operation HOA Freedom is officially online, Mrs. Patel announced, raising her coffee cup in a toast. James sat in his home office at 2 a.m., surrounded by monitors displaying blueprints of his property. After 20 years in cybersecurity, he knew the best defense combined digital and physical elements. The system he'd designed for his home would make most government facilities jealous. You're sure this is legal? Sarah asked, bringing him a fresh cup of coffee. She'd been up late grading papers, but they both knew she was really keeping him company. Every component is registered and permitted, James replied, adjusting a camera angle on his tablet. I learned from the gnome incident. Everything has to be documented, time-stamped, and completely by the book. The security system was a masterpiece of subtle implementation. Cameras disguised as architectural features covered every approach to the house. Infrared sensors monitored the property line. Motion detectors tracked movement patterns. Everything fed into a secure cloud server with redundant backups. James's phone buzzed at 3:27 a.m. that same night. The system had detected its first visitor. The night vision footage showed Patricia Whitmore, illuminated in ghostly green, methodically measuring his grass with a ruler. She photographed each measurement, making notes on her tablet. She moved to the windows next, photographing what appeared to be unauthorized window screens that had come with the house. Got you, James whispered, watching the footage in real time. Every movement was being recorded in high definition, with timestamps and GPS coordinates. The next morning, 3 violation notices arrived by email. Grass 0.4 inches above regulation height, non-approved window screens, and excessive security features visible from street view. Though James had specifically designed everything to be invisible to casual observation, he forwarded the emails to Martha, adding them to their growing documentation. The Oak Ridge Underground's signal group buzzed with activity as they coordinated their response. But Patricia was just getting started. That afternoon, James returned from a meeting to find his Tesla missing from the driveway. A notice had been taped to his front door, vehicle towed for unauthorized color modification, Section 8.42 of HOA bylaws. The citation listed Silver Model 3 as an unapproved shade. James pulled up the HOA guidelines on his phone, there was no Section 8.42. The entire color restriction clause had been fabricated. It took 3 hours and a strongly worded call from Martha to get Joe's towing to return the car. The owner was apologetic, almost frightened. "Look, man, I'm sorry," Joe whispered, glancing over his shoulder as he unloaded the Tesla. "She's got connections at the city permit office. Said she'd have my license reviewed if I didn't cooperate." James added Joe's statement to their evidence file, but Patricia's retaliation was swift. The next morning, his security system captured her husband photographing every inch of James's property at dawn. By noon, James had received 15 new violations, each more absurd than the last. "Your doorbell is 2 inches higher than regulation height," Sarah read from the latest notice, trying not to laugh. "Does she realize how desperate she sounds?" "She's escalating," James noted, reviewing the footage. "Look at her body language, she's angry, making mistakes. Classic signs of someone losing control of their narrative." He pulled up the property records Martha had compiled. Patricia's coordinated harassment campaign had driven out 3 families in the past year alone. But this time was different. This time she was dealing with someone who understood digital forensics. The system pinged again, motion detected at the property line. James watched Patricia prowling near his garage, testing the door handle. She didn't notice the tiny camera hidden in the decorative molding, recording every moment. "Your move, Patricia," he murmured, backing up the footage to their secure server. "Your move." James's phone vibrated against his nightstand at exactly 3:47 a.m. The security system's AI had detected multiple individuals approaching his property from the north side. He slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Sarah, and made his way to his office. The night vision feed showed 2 figures moving with military precision across his lawn. Patricia's platinum blonde hair glowed an eerie green in the infrared lighting, her husband Robert following close behind with a large duffel bag. They wore dark clothing and communicated through hand signals. Clearly, this wasn't their first covert operation. "What are you up to?" James whispered, switching between camera feeds as the pair reached his circular driveway. Robert began removing tools from the duffel bag while Patricia kept watch, her head swiveling like a practiced sentinel. The high-definition cameras captured every detail as Robert carefully lifted sections of decorative gravel, creating shallow trenches at strategic points around the driveway. From the bag came what looked like mechanical housing units, each about 3 feet long. James's security background set off immediate red flags. He recognized the components: retractable vehicle barriers, military grade, typically used at secure facilities. But these had been modified, the standard warning lights and safety features removed. In their place, sharpened steel spikes, designed to shred tires and potentially cause catastrophic vehicle damage. Patricia pulled out a small remote control, testing each unit. The spikes shot up silently from beneath the gravel, deadly steel teeth ready to puncture any vehicle unfortunate enough to cross them. James thought of the neighborhood kids who often rode their bikes up and down his driveway, and his blood ran cold. Through the directional microphone, he caught fragments of their whispered conversation. "Perfect placement," Patricia murmured, marking locations on her tablet. "They'll never see it coming." "What if the kids," Robert started. "They shouldn't be on private property anyway," Patricia cut him off. "Besides, a few flat tires will teach everyone to respect boundaries." James watched as they meticulously concealed their work, replacing the gravel and even using a small rake to eliminate any signs of disturbance. Patricia stood back, admiring their handiwork with an expression of pure satisfaction. She aimed the remote at one section of driveway, and James saw the spikes spring up instantly, a lethal surprise waiting for his family's next arrival or departure. "Let's see them ignore my citations now," Patricia said, her voice carrying a note of triumph that made James's skin crawl. The cameras caught her smile in perfect clarity, the same smile she wore at HOA meetings while discussing property values and community standards. The pair spent another 45 minutes checking and rechecking their work. James documented everything, his security system recording from multiple angles with timestamp verification and GPS coordinates embedded in each frame. He noticed Robert glancing nervously at their surroundings, but Patricia's movements showed no such concern. She believed herself untouchable above consequences. As they finally slipped away into the pre-dawn darkness, James sat back in his chair, processing what he'd witnessed. This wasn't just harassment anymore, this was attempted assault with a deadly weapon. The spikes could cause a fatal accident, especially if triggered while a vehicle was in motion. He pulled up Martha's number on his phone, then paused. This evidence needed to go straight to law enforcement. Patricia had finally overplayed her hand, moving from discriminatory harassment into criminal territory. James began compiling the footage, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Years of cybersecurity work had taught him how to build an ironclad case. By dawn, he'd have everything ready for the police. Every angle, every whispered conversation, every deliberate decision that proved premeditation. Patricia Whitmore's reign of terror over Oak Ridge Estates was about to end. James hadn't spoken to Detective Michael Torres since their college graduation 15 years ago, when they'd shared a cramped dorm room and dreams of changing the world. Now, sitting across from his old roommate in a quiet corner of the police station's cybercrimes unit, those years seemed to vanish. "You're telling me she installed military-grade vehicle barriers in your driveway?" Mike leaned forward, studying the footage on James's laptop. "Where did she even get this equipment?" "That's where it gets interesting," James replied, pulling up a series of documents Martha had compiled. Her husband Robert runs Whitmore Security Solutions. They specialize in residential protection systems for gated communities. But look at these incident reports. The screen filled with police reports from 3 different counties. Mysterious tire damage always targeting specific homeowners. Property damage that couldn't be traced. Accidents that weren't quite accidents. The same pattern, Mike nodded, his detective's instincts kicking in. Minority homeowners, professional couples, families that don't fit the community standard, and always in neighborhoods with strict HOA oversight. "Patricia's been running this playbook for years," James explained. "But she's never dealt with someone who could document everything in real time. Watch this." He pulled up enhanced footage of Patricia testing the remote control, her face clearly visible as she activated the spikes. The audio captured her dismissing concerns about children's safety. "This is attempted assault with a deadly weapon," Mike said, scribbling notes. "But we need to move carefully. People like this, they have connections. One wrong step and evidence starts disappearing." "That's why I came to you first," James said. "We need to catch her in the act, and I think I know how." Over the next hour, they crafted their plan. Martha's legal expertise helped identify every possible charge. Dr. Thompson provided medical records of stress-related health issues from Patricia's previous victims. Mrs. Johnson's daughter, the civil rights attorney, prepared federal documentation. "Here's the key," James pointed to his screen. "Patricia's hosting an HOA security seminar next week. She's invited representatives from 3 other exclusive communities to demonstrate her property protection methods." "Perfect," Mike grinned. "We'll have plainclothes officers in place the moment she demonstrates those spike strips." "Wait," James interrupted, a new email notification popping up. "Look at this. She just sent out the seminar details. She's planning to use my driveway as the demonstration site. She's so confident she's actually going to show off her handiwork." Mike's eyes lit up. "Even better. We can wire your entire property. Get everything on record, from multiple angles, when she triggers those spikes. We'll have her on federal charges," James finished. "Attempted assault, civil rights violations, criminal conspiracy. I'll coordinate with other departments." Mike stood, already pulling out his phone. "We've suspected similar cases in neighboring counties. This could break open a whole network of HOA harassment schemes." James gathered his equipment, but Mike caught his arm. "Hey, remember that ethics class we took senior year? About using tech for good? Looks like we both kept that promise." "Different paths, same goal," James smiled. "Speaking of which, any chance you could spare a few officers to keep an eye on my girls? Patricia's unpredictable, and after seeing those spike strips." "Already on it," Mike assured him. "Unmarked car, 24-hour surveillance. We protect our own." As James drove home, he thought about patterns, how they emerged, how they broke. Patricia had spent years perfecting her system of harassment, believing her position and connections made her untouchable, but she'd never considered that someone might turn her own methods against her. The seminar was scheduled for 2 p.m. next Saturday. In just over a week, Patricia Whitmore would give her last HOA presentation. Saturday arrived with picture-perfect weather, as if nature itself wanted a clear view of Patricia Whitmore's downfall. By noon, unmarked police vehicles were strategically positioned throughout Oakridge Estates. Detective Torres had coordinated with 3 different departments, positioning officers behind hedges in neighbors' houses and even posing as landscape workers. James sat in his home office, monitoring the feeds. Sarah and the twins were safely at her sister's house, though the girls had protested, missing the neighborhood excitement they'd sensed brewing. Through his windows, he could see Martha calmly watering her roses, a wireless earpiece hidden beneath her sun hat connecting her to the operation. At 1:45 p.m., the first luxury SUVs began arriving. HOA presidents from 3 neighboring communities, all drawn by Patricia's promise to demonstrate her ultimate solution to undesirable elements. They gathered in the Whitmore's driveway, a collection of pressed slacks and pearl necklaces, sipping sparkling water from crystal glasses. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia's voice carried across the street, every word captured by James's directional microphones. "Today, I'm going to show you how Oakridge Estates maintains its exceptional standards." She led her appreciative audience toward James's property, tablet in hand. Robert trailed behind, looking increasingly nervous as he carried a remote control device. "Observe," Patricia gestured to the pristine driveway. "Traditional methods, citations, fines, legal threats, sometimes aren't enough to handle certain residents. But with this system," she reached for the remote, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapping around it with practiced confidence. "One touch, and any unauthorized vehicle will regret trespassing on our policy. Freeze." The command cracked through the air like a thunderbolt. Officers emerged from every direction, behind trees, from barrage doors, even from the catering van Patricia had hired for her demonstration. The look on Patricia's face shifted from confusion to disbelief to rage in the span of seconds. She jabbed frantically at the remote, but nothing happened. James had disabled the system's receiver hours earlier. "Patricia Whitmore," Detective Torres stepped forward, badge gleaming. "You're under arrest for attempted assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit civil rights violations, and criminal property damage." Patricia's composure shattered. "This is ridiculous. I am the president off." "Drop the remote control device," an officer ordered as Patricia waved it wildly. In a final act of desperation, she sprinted toward her Mercedes, presumably planning to flee, but in her panic she triggered the one spike strip controller that hadn't been deactivated, the one in her own driveway, installed as a demonstration model for her guests. The sound of shredding tires and scraping metal echoed through the manicured streets of Oakridge Estates as Patricia's luxury SUV lurched to a halt. Its front end crumpled against her own mailbox. The airbag deployed, leaving her stunned and powder-covered as officers converged. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Torres began, securing the handcuffs while Patricia sputtered protests about property values and community standards. Her audience of HOA presidents stood frozen, champagne flutes forgotten in their manicured hands. Robert Whitmore had already surrendered, providing a full confession about their operation in other communities. Martha appeared at James's door, grinning. "I've waited 3 years to see this," she said, watching Patricia being escorted to a police car, her designer outfit now accessorized with stainless steel bracelets. Maria would have loved it. As Patricia passed James's driveway, he noticed something poking through the gravel, a small ceramic hand holding a test tube, one surviving piece of the girls' science gnomes. It seemed to be waving goodbye. "Get this on record," Patricia shrieked as officers guided her into the cruiser. "This entire arrest is unauthorized by the HOA bylaws." The car door shut on her protests, and 15 years of neighborhood terror ended with the simple sound of a latch clicking into place.